Oh my god, video game consoles are dying! This is so sad. 1 like equals 1 console donated to a starving child in need. In all seriousness, no machine is ever built to last forever, and I, personally, would like to get as much life out of every single console I've poured all of my spare money into over the years. So that's why recently, I have been trying to mod or exploit as many of my consoles as possible.
Look at the NTSC Super Nintendo, for example. If you have a pair of pliers and about 2 seconds to spare, boom, it's suddenly a Super Famicom as well. Same deal with the Nintendo 64 here, except I opted to just screw the backplate of an NTSC American onto an NTSC Japanese cartridge, because my console is too shiny. I couldn't hurt it if I tried. Now, in order to get the most out of many old cartridge-based consoles, I would have to invest in an EverDrive or something applicable for whatever console. A nice little modified cartridge with a regular micro SD card slot for storing game ROMs. Now, for preservationist sake, I encourage everyone to back up older game ROMs and ISOs onto the computer if one has the means to do so. Now, when it comes to ROMs and ISOs of games you don't own, is where we move into the gray area between archiving and piracy. If an older game is re-released onto modern platforms by the original developer or publisher, I would encourage you to pick up that release. However, many old games for old consoles are from developers and publishers who are no longer with us. So the games exist in the purgatory of abandonware. And if that's the case, well, it's just one Google search away. And when it comes to downloading Nintendo games... Fuck, they found me. The first console I wanted to modify was the classic PS2. Now obviously console manufacturers didn't want people to modify their hardware, mainly for piracy reasons, so they didn't make it easy. I mean, for the longest time you had to saw off part of the console, put custom pieces in there, probably give up your firstborn child in order to play backup PS2 games. It was a real mess. Thankfully, with the power of an old hard drive, the PS2 network adapter, an external hard drive to USB adapter, and most importantly of all, FreeMcBoot, one can soft mod a fat PS2 in only a few hours. There are many guides out there walking through the steps for that, so I will provide links for that below. I'm mainly just a real fan of how much you can do once FreeMcBoot is installed on your PS2. You can play DVIX or XVID based video files, sometimes, as well as MP3 and FLAC files on Simple Media System. You can launch PS2 games from a hard drive via PS2 OpenLoader. I've loaded a lot of my favorite games that I own copies of, where the discs still work but are heavily scratched, like Simpsons Hit and Run. Now I can run the game as smoothly as any PS2 port of a multi-platform game runs without having to get up off the couch. You can even play backup burnt games on a CD or DVD-R disc using ESR. Just make sure to download the ESR patcher and patch the ISO file before you burn it onto a disc. I did this for many games that are a bit unreasonable to access normally. Take Soul Eater Battle Resonance, for example, a Japanese exclusive port of the PSP game of the same name from 2009. It's not the best fighting game out there, but as a big fan of the Soul Eater franchise and knowing that a re-release of this game is not likely, it's still a fun time beating up all the characters I'm familiar with. It can even play backup PS1 games, right?
Yes?
So remember how I mentioned how much of a mess modding your PS2 was? So Sony made approximately 3 billion different models of the PS2. Unfortunately, in order to play backup PS1 games, you would need a Slim PS2, which the several PS2 consoles I've been able to get my grubby little mitts on are all from the 3000 Fat model series. Or at least that was the case until one random day on eBay when I came across a lot of 2 untested PS2s, one of them being a fat PS2 with another internet adapter, and what is now my first Slim PS2, with only half the screws in place. And after a fight with one of the screws that was completely rusted over, I was able to open the console and for the first time see how Sony was able to put everything that is in this fat boy over here inside this tiny little case. Also, the steps to mod this variant of the console is very easy. So easy that one passive-aggressive tutorial was able to explain how, with the use of a plastic straw, scotch tape, and a tiny piece of tissue is enough to trick the lid of the Slim PS2 into thinking, ah, yes, I'm closed now.
So, a lot of the videos on YouTube right now, they sort of suck.
Pair that with the fact that I had FreeMcBoot already installed onto a memory card, I was able to play LSD Dream Emulator on a console for the very first time. The PSX launcher is the easiest tool to use as well, only requiring you to use an official PSX game until the tray stops spinning, then just swap up with your backup copy and bam, it's loading like I put in a real game. Now, one more example of something I tried but wasn't able to get running was Forbidden Siren 2. This is an expensive Japanese and PAL exclusive horror game that I've been really wanting to try out. Unfortunately, everyone on the internet and I seem to have a hard time getting the PAL version of this game to work on an NTSC console. Now, the Japanese version does work, but it's all in Japanese and I'm not going to have a walkthrough guide next to me translating the entire game in order to play. The PAL version, thankfully, does have several language options, including English, but even patching the ISO file with the PS2 PAL to NTSC program, and then burning the game onto a DVD-R dual layer disc, as the file is over the standard size of a 4.7 gigabyte DVD-R, I can only get as far as the language option before the game crashes, and that is if ESR wants to recognize it at all. As I mentioned, I'm not the only one on the internet that hasn't been able to get this to work, so for now, I'll take the loss, and hopefully someone smarter than me can patch over the English from the PAL version onto the Japanese NTSC one. Or, you know, Sony, you could just throw that shit up on the PSN store for like 10-15 bucks and I'd buy it instantly. Okay, thanks, bye. Let's move on to a console that, in comparison, is much easier to exploit than the PS2. If you live in a post-2016 society, that is. The Sega Saturn was once one of the most difficult consoles to emulate and exploit due to its spectacular copy protection, and with it having a more niche adoption base, the demand for smarter people than me to look into the issue just wasn't there. However, the demand for those games, oh, look at that Panzer Dragoon Saga price. Time to sell that left kidney I wasn't using. Now, the Japanese Sega Saturn I own here is region locked just to Japanese NTSC games, but using this modified Sega Saturn cartridge I found on eBay for about 60 bucks, I can run any game from any region and even backup games as well. Looks like that cost of Panzer Dragoon Saga goes from a few kidneys down to the price of a 50-pack of CDRs at Office Depot. One could also spend more and actually mod the console's disk drive with the Sega Saturn Fenrir? Fentanyl. For around 140 to 60 bones, and load any game straight from an SD card. Knowing how disk drives and lasers in old consoles tend to fail over time, rest in peace my GameCube for now, this might be a better fix in the long run. But for now, I'll be showing off the cartridge. On the top of the cartridge is a slider that you can switch from the 4 megabyte memory card to the 1 megabyte expansion, and then finally the Saturn Sudokai feature. Now, since I own a Japanese Saturn, in order to play any non-Japanese NTSC or unofficial games, just leave the slider on that Sudokai option and it'll boot right into the game after a few seconds. Finally, I can play my American copy of Virtua Fighter 2 with no issues.
Better run home to Mama now.
Yay! Same with backup games here. I'm using a modded version of the Japanese exclusive Initial D game on the Saturn that inserts music from the original anime during the races. If anything, it's easy to just leave the cartridge on the Sudokai option, even if you're just playing games native to your region. And if you need to switch to one of the RAM expansions or the memory card, just move the slider over once you're past the Sudokai boot menu, and you're all good to go. One last console I'd like to discuss today is the Sega Dreamcast. Sega's last hurrah of making hardware is known for using a modified CD format called the GD-Rom to prevent piracy. I'm sorry, the Dreamcast is actually known for how easily it played burnt games and is commonly quoted to be one of the many reasons for the console's ultimate demise after being on the market in most territories for a maximum of 3 years. While the GD-ROM's official games used could hold 1 gigabyte of storage compared to a regular CDR's 700 megabytes, most Dreamcast games I've looked into are less than 500 megabytes, making it very easy to burn a patch CDI file of a Dreamcast game, turn on the console, and just be on your way. I burnt the Sega Dreamcast port of Half-Life for my example, as the game was completely finished but cancelled right before its release due to changing market conditions. It's a bit wonky to play this game with a controller after playing this game my entire life on PC, but besides many more times the game has to load between sections, like there's 6 before you even get off the damn tram, it's a really good port of the game. Not to mention that the Blue Shift expansion was originally meant to be an exclusive for this port. Now, keen listeners may have heard me say most games could be burnt onto a regular CDR. There are several games that did take advantage of those extra 300 megabytes of storage a GD-ROM holds. Now, GD-ROMs were only ever manufactured for official Sega Dreamcast discs, and the few burnable GD-ROMs were only produced in limited quantities for developers to test early builds of games on official hardware. Basically, you can't get a hold of GD-ROMs anymore, making it impossible to burn those 700 plus megabyte games, right? Right? Yes. So before I started going down this rabbit hole, I wasn't even aware that there were CDs produced that held more than the standard 700 megabytes, but turns out that there are even 800 and 900 megabyte discs that you could buy and store up to 90 and 100 minutes of audio respectively. Now, the reason the 700 megabyte disc is the standard and the only type of blank CD you can easily buy now is that both of these discs require you to overburn onto said discs. Basically, you're trying to be super sneaky and fit more information than is normally able to fit. Now, in my search, I have found many games that require slightly larger discs. Illbleed being the example I was the most intrigued to try, as it has never been released on any other console besides the Dreamcast, and getting a copy will require me to sell at least 3 of my fingers in order to purchase right now. So after going onto a website that specializes in selling blank discs and printer cartridges, I got myself a stack of the 800 or 787 megabyte discs and found a few patch files for image burn. I was good to go. However, there was one other Dreamcast game never re-released anywhere else that also costs too much that I really want to play, that being D2. For those unaware, D2 was the only non-Shenmue game for the Dreamcast that was so massive that it needed 4 GD-ROM discs in order to fit the whole experience. So many games, when converted to the CDI format, some of the cutscenes and other files were compressed in order for it to fit on a standard or overburned CDR. D2, however, had the best copy protection of them all because it took a while before some maniac out there figured out a way to split the content into separate image files, which caused this 4-disc game to turn into an 8-disc game instead. This also means people had to make guides to tell you at what point you needed to switch to the second half of the respective disc that has the content used in the second half of what is supposed to be the same disc before you glitch the game out. But the best part about all of this is you can't burn one of these split image files using an average disk burning software. No. You need to have a specialty one. So after days of figuring out and trying to find one that would work on my old Windows 7 computer, I had no luck with running any of the split versions of D2 once I put them into my Dreamcast. The 8-disc split version I found wouldn't run, and neither did the 7-disc split version I found. Even then, on all the forums I could find online, it seems to be a 50-50 chance it'll end up running for you once you burn the game to a disc and put it in a console. And somehow all of that is now giving me more of a headache than the thought of dropping $150 to $200 to get an official complete copy of D2 on eBay. Now, if I was really insane, I could seek out some of those short-lived dual-layer CDs released by Sony that fit 1.3 gigabytes total. But the price of those discs and getting a drive that would for sure be able to burn to those discs, I'd be better off paying the $150 to $200 to get an official copy of D2 instead.
All right, let's wrap up all this insanity for today. I obviously mentioned a lot of expensive and fun video games that exist. Okay, maybe not Illbleed. Trying that out, that was but there are many great and sometimes, unfortunately, hard to find games out there that I would love to own, but I have to pay rent. And I'm not going to give someone on the internet over $1,000 when I can just burn Snatcher to a CDR. If there is a re-release of these older games onto PC or modern consoles, I highly recommend to please support the developers, unless the remasters they come out with are somehow worse than the original. We're all looking at you, Rockstar. However, a good majority of the time, there are so many quality of life improvements that come with modern re-releases of games. Anywhere from the game just runs in 1080p now, to a whole bunch of extra added features, bonus content, and sometimes a lot more love and care than the original release got. However, for those games that unfortunately haven't or probably will never get that dreamed re-release, as I'm not one to go and condone piracy, especially of brand new or still available titles, if you have no other choice, whatever you do to find them out there, just use an ad blocker. Save you a little bit of a headache. Whatever you do, do not download Donkey Kong Jr. Math, as Nintendo will find you, your family, your grandma, your dog, your goldfish, your cousin Eddie, and they'll lock them up for good. Hi, excuse me, sir? Is this the spot you need to be doing all of this? Yes, thank you so much.